Hello all, Game Methuselah. I want to do a little bit of a video here because, quite frankly, it's been a while since I've done one. And I kept thinking of subjects I wanted to talk about. So I might kind of throw a couple of them in here at the same time. My mind right now is based upon what's been going on in my life and being under a dark cloud and not getting things done I wanted and having problems that have been making me unhappy. Writer's block, all the usual things that happen when you're sort of working for yourself, and then one thing doesn't happen, and you sort of muddle through until suddenly one day you break your pencil, and that's it. That's the thing that throws you under the bus. Really just feel you can't go on, and then maybe even gets worse. Somebody hands you an old MMO called City of Heroes that is being done as a fan item right now, and it was a game that we loved many years ago when it was popular, and it got discontinued about it. Somebody has brought it back, and we've been playing it, and that's all it takes is boom, off you go into your own little head and disappear into the ether. And that's not really good. It's not good for me, it's not good for you, and it's not good for my general disposition. We're on track here for the London trip coming in the 21st, 22nd of this month. We're going to England to see all kinds of things for D-Day. Going to stop into London for 4 days and enjoy the gaming environment there. So I'm looking forward to that. Hope to see some stuff at Games Workshop and Warlord Games up in Nottingham. So it all should be good, both historically and in the gaming world. Couple brief things to talk to. What's really related on what's going on here, it's gamer burnout. And that's something that is really big in the role-playing world. And it's difficult to control. And more importantly, it's difficult to sort of find a good remedy for. I made me think about it because obviously my own situation. On top of that, Matt, I think last week or so, mentioned he was like, geez, I just got to sit down and write out my adventure for this week. And I thought, dude, you need to get out there and play in somebody else's game. And he liked it and said, yeah, that's right. And he understands it. And we've talked about this over the years. It's important that you keep perspective when you are DMing games. A lot of times your really great enjoyment, your fabulous ideas, your great worldview, everything becomes exciting when you're writing it out. 4 months into the adventure, it gets a little hard to keep it going because now it's almost more like a job than it is that passion that it should be. And again, I think I've mentioned, I think that's where multiple game masters come into play because they allow you to sort of share the load. And nothing, like I say, really spices up a person's desire to DM like go playing in somebody else's game, especially if it's a good game. And even if it's not necessarily Dungeons and Dragons or even straight role-playing, some good board games, some great miniature games, all those things can help. And over the decades of me role-playing, that's always been my out has been. I would always take breaks from role-playing to do something else. Maybe delve into like Warhammer Fantasy or 40K or Vor or, anything, or collectible card games. I was big into Magic the Gathering and pretty much every other card game that was out at the time. The painting, the playing, the finding other things. But if role-playing is your only passion, the other thing I used to do all the time is I would get different role-playing systems. I was notorious for always bringing some new set of role-playing rules to the group to see. Let's try this out. Let's try that out. Why don't we sit down and generate characters, see if this looks like fun. Sometimes they were winners. Very often they were losers. But the point is, it keeps sort of changing up the game enough so that it keeps it really fresh. And that freshness and that idea that there's more out there both stimulates you as a DM and often gives your players other things to think about that are exciting and hopefully interesting for them. A couple weeks ago, 2 really excellent Dungeons and Dragons role-playing campaigns ended. One was the one that my friend Craig ran for the last year or so. And it was really great. We came down to the end. As best I know, my character is now king. The pact with the devil may be problematic. Maybe I'll have to keep some of the player characters like feeble-minded. I don't know. I'm trying not to do anything, overtly evil. But we'll see how that goes. But the next thing is that Game of Thrones, an 8-year Dungeons & Dragons role-playing campaign, came to its conclusion. Now, the interesting thing about that was I knew it was a role-playing campaign the minute I saw the White Walkers. I said right off the bat, "Oop, don't beat these guys, you lose the campaign." And for those who saw the epic battle, you could see that was absolutely true. The second thing is, so many people have hated the ending. And I find this fascinating because it strikes me that, I can't remember the great author who quoted it, that most things end with a whimper, not a bang. Wars just sort of peter out often. Even the great wars that were magnificent, they're not like a big brass band, even if there is one in a ticker tape parade. Before you know it, it's gone, and now people are on to the real world of governing and all the horrors that were brought upon the world by these great conflagrations. If you do not learn from the disasters of things, they just repeat, having the same problem coming up again. And I don't want that. So when you're feeling pressures on your games, when you're feeling pressure from life and sometimes the gaming doesn't work, don't feel necessarily obligated to cram stuff into your game and push it forward. Now, in some people's case, when it's a obviously weekly event that many thousands of people are preparing for, well, that's a job. That's not a passion. But when it's your passion, pass the load. Get other people to help you out and find new ways to express your creativity in gaming. Board games again, miniature games, all these things, and infest other people with your passion. Get into painting. I've done a bit of that. So it looks like hopefully this week, most likely tomorrow, we're going to work on getting the Dragon's Teeth drawn. So for those who were not happy with the end of Game of Thrones, they wanted the big win, maybe the reveal of the person they wanted. I knew my faction was going to win. I was rooting for the White Walkers. But what I found interesting for anybody who role plays is that is a huge campaign backstory for you to run an ongoing campaign forever. Who knows what's going to go? The great slayer of the undead is now with her magic sword on a boat going to some place that apparently no one has ever gone. Boy, does that not scream for Dungeons & Dragons role-playing adventures. There's a lot there. Look at it as a giant backstory. I'm not sure what people were hoping for when this first started, but as a setup for a role-playing game, I think they just handed you everything on a plate. Now, I don't know whether anyone's going to jump out there and make a role-playing campaign book on Game of Thrones. Maybe somebody already has, and it allows you to play it. But it's pretty cool. I mean, it has sort of everything you want. It's got giants and it's got dragons. And if you got giants and dragons, you pretty much have everything else. And with the Stark daughter now going to realms unknown, well, there's going to be all kinds of additional monsters and interesting things there. You've got a whole setup for a game role-playing campaign. And I think people should jump on it and use it. And that way it lives on. It was a long ongoing campaign. And it had a lot of political aspects to it, which a lot of people don't have in D&D. Matt Colville is about the only person, well, that's not really fair. Don Hawthorne and Matt Colville, who I sometimes think are brothers separated at birth, they both love political role-playing campaigns. So it is likely that they maybe would have delved into something that there was that much infrastructure. For me, it's always find the right king and put him on the throne and hope to God he gets it right. And if they don't, well, then make a pact with the devil and well, you could become king. And I can't imagine anybody who would have done that. But for everyone else out there, sit down and think about this. If you want your own primer for Dungeons & Dragons, there it is. And everybody knows about it. So you could start off at High Garden or any place else. There's just a million things you could do to start your own campaign. Maybe you just have to rebuild some of the cities that have been, well, burned to the ground. And decide where your campaign goes from there. But it gives you a great backdrop. And that way people who, like me, kept drawing from Lord of the Rings from back before I was born, you have a newer, I'm not going to just say fresher, but a newer concept of how to have a role-playing campaign and how the political machinations play in. And wherein I think Lord of the Rings, most everybody was sort of good with a real big bad guy. And even though they didn't get along and they bickered, they didn't necessarily try to murder each other on a regular basis. That is sort of changed, obviously, with Game of Thrones. But the nice thing about it is it does get people used to losing their player characters occasionally when they get stabbed in the back by, well, their best friend. Anyway, I just want to go out and talk about this because a couple things that were fresh out there. Remember, when you've got burnout, find some other stuff to get involved in. Reach out to your friends. The great thing that keeps sometimes the games going is like what Matt gets, and I'm sure Matt Mercer gets as well. You get the people giving you the positive feedback, and all those things are incredible juices to keeping your flow going. So that's what keeps the excitement going, for the fact that there is some level of appreciation shown by players to the people who are providing this level of entertainment. Even a simple thank you. Remember, when your DM's putting in a lot of hours, they're not getting necessarily paid by that hour. And when they're producing a good product for you, you need to at least say, hey, I really appreciate it. We had a great time, and keep it up. I got to tell you, Craig worked his butt off to give us a fabulous campaign. He started out as a low experienced DM. He ended up as a very high experienced DM with very cool magical duels where he had figured out things in the rules that I didn't know. A wizard could counterspell a counterspell. So I cast a spell, somebody counterspells it, I could then use a reaction on my turn to counterspell that. That I didn't know was possible, and it was very, very cool. Both a surprise, but really interesting and dramatic in the play of your game. And that's what you want. Mind the rules for things you might not know. I sometimes get lazy because I've played every edition since the original, plus a dozen other systems, more than likely more than a dozen. So I somehow think I know it all. But sometimes you sit down at the rules and you read them and you go, that's a really good rule. I hadn't thought of that. That's a big improvement over what they had. Let's use that. Now, I may have problems with certain things, but that's always the way you have in games. The best thing to do is make do and play. So until we have a chance to speak again, which I promise you will be a lot sooner than the last video I did, fight me, devils, fight, for I hate peace. Game on.